Testing 1, 2, 3. 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 Testing 1, 2, 3.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started, and certainly we'll recognize the ranking member for today, Mr. Pasquarello, when he gets here. But I first want to thank the witnesses for coming here today, and we will call this subcommittee hearing to order now. We'll start with my opening statement. We will hopefully, by the time we get through that, Mr. Pasquarello will be here. We'll move to him and then go to each of you. So good morning again. For the first time in history, more than 1 million people are waiting on Social Security Administration to process their initial disability claim. Let me say that again. That's 1 million people are now waiting. On average, claims are taking 220 days to be decided. That's more than 100 days longer than it was in 2019, and more than 150 days longer than the Social Security Administration, what it defines as a minimum level of performance. The real world consequences for these individuals who are unable to work and wait for their disability decision is devastating. Many of these families and many of these individuals really get hurt by these delays. To help illustrate what the Social Security Administration's claim process looks like from a claimant's perspective, I'd like to submit for the record a statement provided to us by a beneficiary who waited more than a year for a decision that should have taken months, if not weeks. Without objection, I'd like for this statement to be entered into the record. She has a very, very severe condition and was unable to travel, and she was unable to be here to testify. But in place of that, instead of me reading the words and using that, I would like to play a recording of her statement as part of this opening statement. So with that, we will begin the recording.
It was a semi-typical day. I was leaning on the countertop in our hall bathroom, waiting for my 2-year-old to finish going to the toilet. My husband was in the bedroom sleeping off the previous night's third shift from his job, but had his phone on full blast in case I needed help. Suddenly, the muscles around my ribs cramped and I could barely get air in. I pulled out my cell phone and called my husband and said one quiet word: help. As I went to my knees, I thought to myself, I'm going to die on the bathroom floor in front of my 2-year-old. At that moment, the Social Security Administration had denied my claim for disability, stating that I was capable of work. If my husband hadn't brought my rescue medication, I would have died that day. Stiff person syndrome is an exceptionally rare, literally 1 in a million, permanent and progressive autoimmune neurological condition that the primary symptom is severe muscle cramps and spasticity. The spasms in me have torn multiple ligaments, broken multiple ribs, given me multiple attacks where I cannot breathe, and have left me screaming in agony more times than I can attempt to count. It also affects my central nervous system, causing things like seizures and vision problems. I do my best to complete something productive each day and be a member of my small family, but most of my time is spent asleep, either because of sheer exhaustion or the many medications I have to take each day. The two primary causes of death from stiff person syndrome are spontaneous apneic episodes and suicide. Let me repeat that. I am most likely to die from suffocation or suicide. It took me weeks to complete the Social Security application, both because of the breadth of information required, as well as system errors that would cause entire pages to empty of data. I received many unclear letters in the mail. Each time this occurred, I had to call up to confirm that my application hadn't been lost and that I was still in the queue to be deemed disabled. Stiff person syndrome is on the compassionate allowance list. These are supposed to be the cases where the illness is so severe that there doesn't need to be a wide assessment of validity of disability. However, my case was not treated this way. My case was denied. We were living on savings and a very small private disability insurance payment. Each month, we were calculating how much longer we had to live before the money ran out. I emptied my 401k. We had to pay bills late. we had to delay some treatments for my autistic son. Once my case was finally reassessed, my disability claim was approved and we received back pay, but my lawyer wasn't paid, and now I have to figure out how to address that issue. I am still awaiting my first monthly payment, but it has taken 15 months. This process can be made better for both employees of the Social Security Administration and claimants by simplifying it.
Wow. Words say an awful lot. I know, I almost wish at this point that we had our district office staffs here to tell story after story after story about what they deal with. And while the Social Security Administration claims it is working to address the backlog, we're seeing things go in the wrong direction. We're spending $100 million to fund outreach efforts aimed at increasing initial disability claims. And while they, on their own, disability claims have been declining on their own. Let me put this in plain English. If the Social Security Administration is unable to keep up with the claims that it has now, but is spending hundreds of millions of dollars to get more claims, it doesn't make sense, and it feels like that those dollars should be going to address the issue that is at hand. Over the past 12 years, the Social Security Administration has invested more than $300 million to obtain an up-to-date occupational data and to determine whether a claimant can work a job in today's economy. And although the SSA has acknowledged that this data is more useful and more accurate, they continue to rely on occupational data that is more than 30 years out of date. These are just a couple of examples of how the SSA is making life harder for claimants and making more work for itself. There are many more that we'll hear about today, and I hope that when we're finished with this, we will begin to be able to figure out better solutions so that we can help these claimants and help their families. That's what we should be about doing. So with that, I will yield to my good friend, gentleman from New Jersey and ranking member for this hearing, Mr. Pasquale. Sir, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to be back in the neighborhood. I'm going to say some things now that should not be misinterpreted as me not wanting to sit down and the rest of our group wanting to sit down to find solutions to problems. You will always find us there at your calling. But I think we got to make some things clear here. I look at this hearing as a kind of smokescreen, a cover-up for the majority's extremist agenda to gut Social Security, chapter and verse. The other side, your side, voted over and over again, and you can't escape that. It either happened or it didn't happen. To cut the Social Security Administration's budget. These cuts only make disability delays far longer. Social Security is one of the America's greatest success stories. 40% of seniors, 50% of disabled beneficiaries would live in poverty without Social Security. Social Security still stands as a monument to decency, dignity, hardworking Americans after nearly 90 years. Yet, throughout its storied history, it has been under attack. Going back to 1935, it has been the subject of scurrilous attacks and lies from day one. There is a history here, which we all should appreciate. Let's not forget that House Republicans, Mr. Chairman, brought our nation to the brink of devastating default with the debt ceiling debacle. And we're going to go back to that not this time, but other time. We nearly saw millions of Americans cut off from Social Security for the first time in history. And we can't forget that. I'm not going to forget it. And I know you won't either. And the Republican Study Committee, which represents 3/4 of all the House Republicans, proposed slashing Social Security benefits by $718 billion over 10 years, which comes to over $750 billion, or $70 billion rather, every year. That's a lot of money. Far from Social Security saviors, I think the majority insists on seeking its destruction because they have a better idea. And we're going to wait for this better idea like we waited for the peace treaty of Vietnam. Where is it? I can't ask the guy who talked about it because he's no longer here. Our nation's retirement system is lurching toward insolvency. We've got to do something about it. We can do it. All of us. We can do this. No one party can do this. No one party. We have a sacred responsibility to address the actual challenges facing Social Security. We cannot tackle delays without ensuring that customer service at the Social Security Administration is fully funded. We must eliminate the mandatory 5-month waiting period for disability benefits, as my friend John Larson, Social Security 2100 Act will do. Enough dishonesty and misdirection. We either sit down, we either work this out, or Social Security will not be here. You can't save it. I can't save it. We got to do it together. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the ranking member. We'll address many of those points throughout this hearing. But again, the purpose of this is to figure out just one small section of what the Social Security Administration does, which is to process disability claims, and how can we do that better, more cleanly, and help Americans who need this vital service. So with that, I'll have the pleasure of introducing our witnesses. Ms. Linda Kerr Davis is the Acting Assistant Deputy Commissioner of Operations for the Social Security Administration. Thank you for being here. Ms. Jacqueline Russell, President of the National Council of Disability Determination Directors. Mr. David Camp is the Interim CEO for the National Organization of Social Security Claimants Representatives. Thank you for being here. Ms. Jennifer Burdick is co-chair of the Consortium for Citizens with Disabilities Social Security Task Force. And lastly, Mr. Mark Woloschky, a senior fellow for the American Enterprise Institute. Thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to your testimony. We look forward to the back and forth. We hope to learn an awful lot from you today. With that, Ms. Kerr Davis, you may begin when you are ready.
All right. Well, thank you, Committee Chair Ferguson, Representative Pascrell, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to discuss our disability adjudication process and our strategy to reduce wait times. We appreciate your partnership on this important topic. I'm Linda Kerr Davis. I'm the Acting Assistant Deputy Commissioner of Operations at Social Security. Prior to joining SSA, I worked for the Kansas Disability Determination Services. Currently, over 15 million people rely on disability benefits to provide for basic needs like food, shelter, and medical care. Meanwhile, pending levels and wait times for determinations on all initial disability claims and disability reconsiderations are at all-time highs. Pending initial disability claims have exceeded 1 million claims. Applicants are waiting on average 7 months for a decision. This is simply not acceptable to you or to us. The DDSs are experiencing record high employee attrition and difficulty hiring qualified examiners to replace them. They have also at times been challenged with reduced access to medical evidence, which began with the COVID-19 public health emergency and was compounded by a shortage of consultative examination providers. In response to this crisis, a team of SSA experts worked to identify root causes of the backlog, implement short-term improvements while also developing a long-term strategy to resolve the backlog. Working within the constraints of our current budget, the strategy involves improvements in 4 key areas. First, processing capacity. Second, recruitment and retention. Third, business processes and policies. And finally, information technology. We are increasing our processing capacity by redirecting experienced personnel from across the agency to process cases for the DDSs, starting with claims for the individuals who've been waiting the longest. We established cadres of SSA experienced employees and rehired annuitants to help the DDSs process initial level claims. Last fiscal year, these cadres completed over 27,000 initial claims in addition to the claims processed by the DDSs. We have engaged directly with many states to increase recruitment and retention of state employees who process claims. The acting commissioner has contacted governors explaining how improved pay and other policies for these employees will help the citizens of their states as well as SSA. Last fiscal year, the DDSs made progress by hiring about 2,500 full-time staff and ended the year with over 700 additional full-time staff on duty compared to fiscal year 22. We are also working on improvements in business processes and policies. We continue to retrain field office staff to help make the disability determination easier for the DDSs by paying close attention to situations in which we can expedite disability payments. We've also taken steps to improve our information technology. We implemented a national case processing system, which replaced 52 independently operated DDS legacy systems. Today, all DDSs are using a uniform and modern system to process disability claims efficiently. The steps we have taken are beginning to show positive results. In fiscal year 23, we processed over 90,000 more initial disability claims than we did in fiscal year 22. Our goal of returning to pre-pandemic processing timeframes, however, is going to take years and will require sufficient and sustained resources. Our disability programs provide a vital safety net for your constituents. With the support of Congress, we have shown that we can tackle and overcome significant operational challenges, such as the hearings backlog crisis in 2016. We have a strategy to improve service and reduce the time your constituents must wait for a disability decision. Similar to our mutual success with reducing the hearing backlog, improving service for initial claims will require the support from Congress. Thank you for your interest in our efforts to improve service for the American public, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much. Ms. Russell, you're now recognized.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Ferguson, Ranking Member Pascarell, and committee members for this opportunity to share. My name is Jacqueline Russell. I'm the president of the National Council of Disability Determination Directors. We're thankful to have membership from every state, and we regularly seek input from our membership on needs and best practices. I'm proud also to be the director for the North Carolina Disability Determination Services, and I have submitted written testimony that has details and data and examples of what I'm going to talk about today. I thank you for reading that. I'm starting our conversation with the strengths of disability determination agencies, which are in every state processing these disability claims. Disability determination staff are innovative, we're adaptive. We've proven that through the pandemic as we found new sources for paper, and we're adaptable. We also have reallocated staff to process disability claims, staff from our disability hearings unit, professional relations office. Everybody is pitching in, and we're making progress on reducing the backlog. We have a long way to go, and we need your help with that. That leads me to just two focuses today that I want to talk about for areas of need. The first is a strong workforce. Disability determination staff, we need to be able to hire on an as-needed basis, in particular when we have losses. At the Disability Determination Agency, our budget already includes those personnel costs for staff. And when we have doctors or disability examiners that leave, we need to be able to have consistent, stable hiring authority every year for those losses. That will help us with our retention. We also need to have consistent overtime access for all case types. We're thankful that this week we received overtime to support continuing disability review cases, and that is important. We also need consistent overtime for initial and reconsideration cases so that we maintain this progress that we've been making on the backlog. Additionally, I want to share two efficiencies. The first one is communications. Currently, disability determination staff, we have two approaches to connect with claimants. The first is the U.S. Postal Service, and the second is by phone. And in this day and age, a lot of people don't like to pick up the phone when you call them. And so it makes it hard for us to reach our claimants to find out if they're willing to go to a consultative examination, or remind them of the upcoming appointments, or if we need to have information clearer from the forms that they've submitted. And I appreciate that the Social Security Administration has indicated interest in that and identified that as a need as well. There are two barriers to that I've heard. One is security of the personal identifiable information, and the second is funding. With security, we know that the Veterans Administration is able to address that with their patients. My father receives a text message when he has a medical appointment from the Veterans Administration. So I feel like we can work together to figure out security. The second barrier is funding, and I can appreciate that the Social Security Administration has priorities for funding, and Congress wants to make sure everyone is a good steward of their dollars. Disability determination staff and our claimants, we're in the middle of this, and we really need to focus on how we find common ground so that we can use our dollars well to support the people that we serve. The second efficiency I want to talk about is a decisional authority, and I appreciated, Chairman Ferguson, what you shared with the claimant's message, because that's the exact type of decisional authority that we would like to see happen. A decisional authority would allow a trained disability examiner to make a decision on some case types without review from a medical consultant and psychological consultant. Those would often be a critical or terminal illness, and that allows us to get the decision to the claimant faster. Now, we know this can be done with high quality because the Office of Inspector General did a study on a past pilot that showed 97% accuracy with this. And so that was high quality, and also an average of 11 days faster processing time. So we know that a decisional authority would support people applying for disability benefits to receive that. North Carolina was a part of that pilot, and in 2015 studied that impact. We were able to process 12.7% of our workload with that decisional efficiency, and that was the equivalent of 12 medical consultants, our hardest to recruit and retain staff, and our highest pay. In closing, I want to share that we're all here to serve the public, and I ask that disability determination agencies receive your support in realizing solutions to these challenges. I'm thankful for the teamwork from Acting Commissioner Kijikazi and Associate Commissioner John Owen, who have listened to our concerns and are taking some action steps around that. And I ask for your support as well in finding a solution, obtaining a solution for consistent hiring authority, overtime, a decisional authority for disability examiners, and communications that meet claimants' needs. I look forward to any questions that you have and our teamwork to serve the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. Mr. Camp, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Ferguson, Ranking Member Pasquarel, members of the subcommittee. I am David Camp, CEO of NOSCR, and we are the specialized bar association for those who represent the Social Security claimants. From 2010 to 2022, Social Security disability claims declined by 37%, and SSI claims are down 49%. With the claims workload cut by more than a third, almost half, budget and staffing strains alone cannot explain this growing backlog. The problem is Social Security's policies. National average processing times are now more than 250 days for each step in Georgia, more than 300 days each in Florida. Social Security has a minimum acceptable standard of under 60 days, a standard never met in 40 years. 40 years. Reconsideration is optional, and Social Security has been telling this committee about possibly eliminating it since 1984. Social Security recently tested eliminating it in 10 states for 20 years. But this committee has never been provided with the results, data for or against eliminating it in some states, everywhere, or nowhere. If there is a data-driven reason for reconsideration, show us. To explain the problem from our perspective, here is an example. A lawyer in Alabama contacted me last week with this timeline for a case. The claimant filed his claim in July 2021. He was denied initially and again on reconsideration. This took 645 days, 547 of which were reconsideration. The reconsideration findings were identical. More than 90% of findings at reconsideration are exact duplicates of those at initial, often word for word. Word for word, hundreds of days later. He filed a request for hearing by a judge this May. He was scheduled for hearing after his claim had been pending for 832 days. His hearing should have been last week, but there was no point. He died earlier this month on day 825 of his claim. He died from the conditions that he applied with that went untreated. He sought help from Social Security with 825 days to live, and Social Security wasted more than 500 days at reconsideration. He could not live long enough to outlast Social Security's capacity to delay. In addition to reconsideration, there are other policies that require immediate attention, corrections that would add efficiency and savings right now. In August, Social Security suddenly stopped accepting faxed applications. We'd like to see Social Security modernize, so we were shocked that they would leap that far backward. There is no reason not to honor a faxed application. Now, claimants and representatives fax to mark the date, then mail what we faxed, then mail it again until Social Security acknowledges the mail. This adds an absurd delay to claims, and it must be corrected. The front line of communication with claimants is the representative's office. Yet when we call and manage to get through, we're only allowed to get an update on one case at a time. We want to help Social Security manage communications with claimants, and our role is to speed up the process, but Social Security imposes barriers. Social Security should allow representatives to verify entry on a claim electronically and stop capping our attempts to check online status at 10 cases. A recent rule change introduced a new problem and a new slowdown for veterans. Social Security now ignores VA decisions. A 100% disabled veteran is now less likely to be found disabled in Social Security's process than someone who hasn't served. This must be stopped immediately. Electronic signatures are safe and secure, and it's unnecessary to call to verify them. When Social Security gets an electronic signature, they make the staff call claimants to verify. This means personnel are calling out when they could be handling calls coming in or doing something else productive, and it slows the process. Social Security should provide us with the same data available to claimants in their My Social Security accounts. We're ready to help a claimant speed up the process and provide what's needed, but often can't at the early stages. Finally, Social Security must stop using the dot. Pneumatic tube operators have been replaced by email. Addressers have been replaced by the printer. Recently, claimants in Savannah, Wichita, and Flint have all been turned down, citing these long-gone jobs. This happens every day in every district. The Department of Labor already has a working version of a paid-for replacement. Social Security must switch to using current data and finally end the embarrassment of the dot. Thank you, and NOSCR looks forward to continuing to work with the committee and with Social Security.
Thank you, Mr. Camp. Ms. Burdick, you're now recognized.
Chairman Ferguson, Ranking Member Pascrell, and members of the Social Security Subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'm here on behalf of the Consortium for Constituents with Disability, the largest coalition of national organizations on behalf of people with disabilities. I've also been a Social Security disability attorney for the last 10 years. Now, make no mistake, SSDI is vital to the people who receive it. And I appreciate, Chairman Ferguson, you centering the claimant story at the beginning, but I want to spend some time highlighting how critical this is by sharing a few more of my client stories. The first is my client, Miss C. When I met her, She had just been terminated for her job as a scheduler from a large hospital where she'd worked for 20 years. The thing is, in her 20s, she was the victim of a very violent crime that triggered mental health symptoms. With the help of a psychiatrist and a therapist, she was able to continue working for many years, but then her mental health declined. And despite medical leaves with more extensive treatment, she eventually was terminated. Now, fortunately, she learned that while working for almost 20 years, she had paid into the Social Security system, earning insurance not only for retirement, but also in case of severe work-limiting disabilities. So she applied, but like 62% of claimants, she was denied when she first applied, and like 85% of people, she was denied a reconsideration review, which I know we've heard a lot about today. She eventually was approved and received $1,400 a month, which is very close to the average but modest SSDI benefit of $1,483 a month, but it was enough to keep her in her home. Another client, Miss G, was a longtime hospice nurse, but she was born with a heart defect, which despite 2 surgical repairs, eventually gave her debilitating heart disease. And at 47, she could no longer work and needed a home health aide, going from being the nurse to being the patient. Like Miss C, she applied for SSDI and was eventually approved for $934 a month, which was a safety net to ensure that she was able to stay housed and provide food. But like Miss G, this took a while. It took 18 months for her to get benefits, the whole time she had no income and relied on the help of family. Now, my first 2 clients, it took a while for them to get benefits, but they weren't caught up in the DDS backlog, like one of my most recent clients, Miss P. She applied in March 2021. It took her 239 days for the DDS to issue a decision on her initial application, which is 7 months and 25 days. And then it took 300 days for her to get a decision on reconsideration. So she had been waiting for more than 17 months when we were able to even request a hearing before a judge, which is frustrating because that is where most people are approved. And this delay is having serious consequences for her right now. She has no income, and unlike some of my other clients, she doesn't have family who can help. So she's been living in shelter in Philadelphia. And because some of the shelters don't allow her to stay with her children, she's had to live separately from her children from time to time, which is adding additional distress. Now, I highlight these stories because I think they really showcase the importance of this disability benefit. It does lift more people out of poverty than any others, but also the impact of these delays. Now, SSA is not going to be able to address this backlog without adequate funding. I know you've heard from the speakers before that due to chronic disinvestment, SSI has been seriously downstaffed, and that's hit DDSs particularly hard. And these staffing losses have come at the same time that there are new Social Security rules like the all evidence rule that are making claims bigger than they ever were before, meaning that there just needs to be more bodies to work these claims. And this won't happen unless Congress provides SSA with meaningful sustained funding consistent with the President's fiscal year 2024 budget request. Now, in my written testimony, I've also highlighted a number of process recommendations that would also assist with this backlog at the margins. But the one I really want to highlight and that would have the most significant impact is eliminating reconsideration review. I know Mr. Camp just talked about this as well, but this level of review is largely seen as a rubber stamp. I'm from Pennsylvania. I was one of the states where we didn't have it for 20 years, and I can't say that it has helped the process for any of my claimants. And by eliminating it, DDS staff could immediately be freed up to focus on the initial claims and work on this backlog. Now, I will be very happy to answer questions about this or other recommendations from CCD. Thank you very much for having me here today.
Thank you, Mrs. Burdick. Mr. Wachowski, you're now recognized.
Thank you. Chairman Ferguson, Ranking Member Pascrell, and members of the subcommittee. I am Mark Warshawski, a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. From July 2017 through January 2021, I was Deputy Commissioner for Retirement and Disability Policy at Social Security, where I led the development of a revamp of the medical vocational roles for eligibility for disability benefits. I understand now is a very difficult time at the agency. No doubt there are many causes for this sudden and sharp deterioration in service and employee morale, and that these causes are both short-term and long-term in nature. But I want to focus today on a very important long-term solution to the service and resource problems at the agency. The currently needlessly complex and outdated rules and data that both claimants and the agency use to determine eligibility for disability benefits have to be simplified, modernized, and automated. And actually, a fully specified disability eligibility simplification and modernization proposal currently exists at the agency, waiting to be published. And really the question is, where is it? But first, let me give you just a bit of background to determine eligibility for disability benefits. SSA uses a 5-step evaluation process. The last 2 steps constitute the medical vocational rules, and they have not changed since 1978. They largely rely on job requirements data from the Dictionary of Occupational Titles, the DOT, which was created during the Great Depression and last partially updated by the Department of Labor in 1991 and not since. Among its 14,000 occupations, and I liked Mr. Camp's example, I have a few others, which are deemed to exist in significant numbers in the economy. The DOT has a phonograph cartridge assembler and a web press operator, print, but does not have a web designer. Furthermore, it has never included the mental requirements of work, an increasingly important factor in the modern work environment, as we've heard today. The regulation adopted in 1978 included a fairly prescriptive vocational grid for Step 5, which is outdated and largely inadequate. It is now used only in about 10% of Step 5 cases. For the rest, the rules are a framework, but they rely on a detailed and often very semi-informed analysis of job requirements and numbers of available jobs in the economy by SSA vocational specialists and vocational experts paid for by SSA. This adds time and it adds expense. These rules also dictate a difficult, expensive, and often inconsistent and arbitrary assessment of the ability to adjust or transition to new work at older ages. This also takes time and is very, very inefficient. The grid or the framework, it produces arbitrary and inequitable results, often related to age, and in my testimony I give some examples. There are particularly noticeable jumps in awards at age 50, which the regulations call closely approaching advanced age. Age 55, advanced age, and age 60, demarcations in the current regulations, giving considerable and increasing leniencies in eligibility standards. The natural increase in disability awards, according to objective definitions of disability, would be much more gradual with age without those rules. And there have been many changes in the American labor force since the 1970s that really do add weight to the case for reform. People are working longer, older people are working longer. There are a lot of new technologies and changes in the economy that reduce the physical aspects of jobs. There's a lot more part-time work than with substantial pay than there was in the past. This is not reflected at all in the current regulations. A modernized vocational database should replace the woefully out-of-date data currently in use. As we've heard, the Bureau of Labor Statistics and its team of nearly 200 field economists have produced in 2019 and 2020 a complete first wave of detailed occupational requirements, ORS information. Thus far, ORS has cost the SSA about $300 million, now roughly $42 million a year to run the survey, and we have not seen its use yet. With this new nationally representative data on work requirements, policymakers can make sensible policy changes to the programs. For example, if only entry-level work is considered as Step 5, the complex and time-consuming transferability of skills analysis performed at older ages can be omitted entirely, a significant simplification. Similarly, all this data would be housed in a public platform called the Vocational Informational Tool, the VIT, that combined with the streamlined new regulations would simplify and automate the vast majority of claims. When I left the agency in January 2021, this rule was ready to be published. We know that under current rules, some claimants are being inappropriately denied benefits and others are inappropriately being awarded benefits. This should not continue. Thank you for your invitation to speak, and I'm glad to answer your questions.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Now we'll move to the question and answer session. Every now and then, my dear friend from New Jersey and I both agree on something. There are a lot of times I just simply want to look at him and go, "Bless your heart." But we have found something that's common here, and I was going to jump on it. I'm going to ask my friend to, when it's his turn for questioning, to address it, and that was Mr. Camp, your your description of the difference between when a claimant is 100% disabled by the VA and they're not by the Social Security Administration. We're going to dive into that a little bit later. But a couple of things that stood out to me in the testimony. Ms. Davis, just an observation. You went through a list of things that, that you were looking to do to improve, and you said, and finally, IT, or finally, technology. I certainly don't mean to sound like I'm preaching to you, but I would start with IT and not make it the final thing that you've got to go to. We've heard time and time again from the administration that it is all about personnel and increased money for that personnel. Certainly understand that it does take people, but I think there has to be a renewed interest, not a renewed interest. There has to be laser focus on the implementation of proper technology. I just think that you cannot, no business in America, no government agency can solve the problems that they have with processing if they don't use proper technology. We found it again, twice in one hearing. Oh, I don't know what that means. Yeah, exactly. It does have me worried. But I'll just make that observation on there. As I get into my questions here, Ms. Russell, you made a comment. You said that if you have consistent hiring authority, you said that would help with retention. I'm confused because you got to hire somebody to fill an open slot. How does that action help with retention? You see, I mean, it just looks like you're saying, all right, we just need to hire more folks so it helps with retention. Why are they leaving to begin with? Hiring somebody doesn't seem to address the problem why they're leaving.
Thank you, Chairman Ferguson, for
Yeah.
that question. And it's a great question. The way that helps disability determination agencies is if we have consistent hiring authority to replace our losses, then we have consistent staff there to process those claims. When staff leave, their caseloads have to be reallocated to other staff. So that means we have staff with increased workloads, which leads to burnout, and then that leads to attrition because people can only work the amount of hours that they have in a day. And when they have a higher workload, then that leads to pressure for them, which leads for them to leave. And the Disability Determination Agency staff, they care so deeply about this work. I'm struck by that when I first arrived at the DDS. They care so deeply, and they take this home with them, and they wear this. And so when they're not able to turn a decision around in a reasonable time frame, they have a lot of guilt associated with that, and that they're
All right, thanks for the clarification on that. One of the things that I look at, we've seen is that, Mr. Camp, I'm going to address this to you. If we're having trouble meeting the current caseload, and then you're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars trying to go scoop up more people to bring them into a program that is naturally declining in its initial applicants, does that seem like a good resource, a good use of resources?
There are certainly improvements in what we already are using that need to be taken today. There are changes that need to be made now with already paid for new programs as to the dot replacement and processes that are obviously just available with a policy change. If you have 90% of findings at reconsideration not involving any additional effort or work or findings, word for word the same as they were 300 days earlier in the process, that should represent an opportunity for some savings, for some 9 out of 10, perhaps, savings at that stage. It's not hard to find activity at initial and reconsideration that isn't necessary and that is slowing things down. There are opportunities for the use of the current staffing and the current budgetary authority that also involve those of us on the outside of the program that speak for the claimants, that speak to the claimants, and that advocate on their behalf. We will get it done. If you give us the information online, let us see what's happening on a case. we will get it done. We will answer the claimant's questions. We will go get that evidence. We will speed up their process if they let us do it. And we'll do it without an appropriation.
Okay. When we talk about updating the job roles, Ms. Warshawski, I think you touched on, you talked about this in your testimony. In your opinion, is there a good explanation why this has not been done?
Chairman, I don't have an explanation. The agency has been aware of this problem with the out-of-date DOT for already 20 years. They tried various other data sources, and they decided already almost 15 years ago to go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics to sponsor a survey. It took some time to sort of get that organized, but the data is in. It was validated, and it's been published. So it is a mystery to me why it has not been used.
Well, let's go back down to the other end here. Ms. Davis, since you're in the middle of it,
Sure.
help us solve this mystery.
All right. Well, thank you for the question.
I mean, because 20 years is, we heard from a group last week talking about when we were looking at, dealing with trying to speed up claims on the beneficiary side. We've got programs that were authorized 8 years ago that still haven't been implemented. So same thing. Yeah, you got great technology. Explain to us why y'all can't get this done.
Okay, thank you, first of all, for the question. So while I've not been directly involved in any of these policy discussions, I understand that this is a complex, multi-year plan that we need to move through.
20 years ain't long enough.
Well, that is long enough, yes. We have been making progress, and we have met our goals for reviewing and updating the medical criteria and also the occupational data. And
Ms. Davis, again, I promise I'm not trying to be combative.
Yeah,
I'm just trying
sure.
to understand. So you've met your goals, okay? Yet we're 20 years from implementation. You've met your reviews. Why is there are those goals published? Can you provide us a copy of those stated goals and how many steps it will take to get this implemented so that some poor individual is not sitting in front of Congress in 5 more years going, why is it 25 years instead of 20 years?
Yeah.
Can you provide us those goals and we can see the steps of how y'all are trying to implement something that seems like it could be done very quickly?
sure, we're happy to submit that for the record.
Thank you.
Any changes to our policies have to be well supported by the evidence and designed to achieve decisional accuracy. So while 20 years is a long time, there have been things going on behind the scenes. But let me provide a written response for the record so that you can understand the steps that we've gone through.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, because 20 years is an awfully long time,
I agree.
particularly when you have someone like Mr. Camp described that simply could not outlast Social Security to receive a benefit. Very sad story. Mr. Camp, quick question, and then I'll move on. I'll let others have this. And this is some data that we have on disability decisions. At the initial level, 38% are allowed, 62% are not allowed. And Ms. Burdick, I think you touched on this as well, so I'm going to let y'all address this. When you go into the reconsiderations, 15% were allowed, 85% were disallowed. Okay, so you've got a huge chunk over here that are not being allowed. Then when it gets to the administrative law judge hearing, it's almost like this thing flips and goes the other direction, where you have 51% that are allowed at that process, 39% denied. So we've gone from 85 to 39 at this point. Who's right and who's wrong? Is the judge right or is Social Security right? Mr. Camp, I'll start with you.
If you compare the attention paid to the claim at the early stages to the attention paid to the claim by a judge with a lawyer in the room, with witnesses called, with all of the evidence updated. It is 15 minutes to hours. Hours is better. 15 minutes is not enough time to read thousands of pages of medical records and get anything right. And some of the time at reconsideration, it's not the 15 minutes. If the consultant physician comes in and there is no new evidence, which is often the case, they are given an agree button to click. 300, 500 days later, come in, you don't even need to spend the full 15 minutes, just click a button and walk back out. That is not an adjudication process at all. That's just days waiting, and it's not service to the claimants. At the ALJ stage, that does not occur. There are hearings, the judge looks at the file for hours, has clerks assisting, the attorneys can do their work. We see all of the exhibits, we see the statuses change, we see the expert that's been called to testify, we prepare. We can help the agency get it right at the ALJ stage, and we are blocked at initial and reconsideration.
Ms. Burdick, could you address this what appears to be sort of major problem at the beginning of the process? Could you offer suggestions on how to improve that for the folks that you represent?
Absolutely. Well, at the initial claim, the claim goes, it's a paper claim that goes to the DDS to adjudicate. And the initial, and as you said, 38% of people are.
And now you can't even use faxes, right?
You can't use faxes, though you can sometimes be on electronically. So if people come to us early, we are helping to get the evidence, submitting it to the initial adjudicator who is looking at it. But there is only so much you can do on a claim when you are just looking at paper. So the difference between when the case is a DDS and when it moves on to administrative law judge is you have a human in the room and you have the claimant has an opportunity to go before that judge and explain how their combinations of impairments really meet the standard, right? A lot of people are not just don't have just one problem that makes them disabled. Frequently, you have a lot of things that come together, right? And so what's problematic about having this secondary level of review is if they can't see it on the paper at the initial claim, why is another person gonna be able to do that same thing? What you really need is that different format where there is a conversation. But to help people at the earlier level, having one of the things that we think is most important is rejiggering the current rules to make sure those initial adjudicators are getting more treating source evidence. It makes common sense that people's treating providers know the most about them. They have a history with you. They've talked to you most of the time. But frequently we find that even where people have those providers, the DDSs aren't doing a good enough job at getting that evidence. And it's not their fault. The rules aren't well calibrated. They send 2 letters, then they rely on these consultative exams that we've discussed, or that earlier people discussed where a one-time Social Security doctor might talk to someone for 10 minutes. It's just, really focused on getting treating source data and looking at that would improve things.
All right, thank you so much for that. Mr. Pasquarello, you are now recognized. Thank you. Let me say this, thank you all for those thoughtful answers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to continue your last line of questioning. Associate myself with what you were saying and what you're implying here. Because this is not simply going to be solved by putting more resources and money. Remember the IRS debates that we had. We know the cuts that existed over administrations that were both red and blue. As I always say, no party is privileged virtue that I know of. But Mr. Camp, your testimony is quite, I went over it again. Very interesting when you talked about veterans. I'm almost numb when I talk about veterans. And I think in the area which you covered, eliminating reconsideration, I'm even more concerned about a vet going to get some help from Social Security, SSI, disability. And I know from listening to many people that simply, it's nothing simple, but just having an increase in resources, more money to do the solution is not enough. Because if we don't have the right policies, then we're defeating ourselves by simply duplicating if we think that just more folks are going to solve the problem. I want to make that very, very, very clear. And, you could simply, slide it away by saying, just throwing money at the problem. You've heard that millions of times. But there is a problem. Money is part of the solution, but policies probably are a greater part of the solution. Would you agree?
Yes.
How do you get that point across? Besides, your illustrations are the best, or what?
The actual experiences of real claimants have to drive this policy. See it from the perspective of a veteran that went through the VA's disability process already. Lots of expense, lots of time, lots of filling out forms, going to see their doctor. They see all of their evidence. Now that same person with that same evidence and those same conditions goes to another federal government agency and has to repeat the entire process and has that second agency say, we will not pay attention to the VA's findings. See it from that veteran's perspective.
Right.
That drives the policy decision then, which is that all adjudicators at Social Security should pay careful attention and discuss how they've considered the findings of the VA.
I think that's a good model example for a lot of federal agencies. These are replicated in most of the agencies that we were mentioned this morning. But I think it's something we need to dig into. You have to have modern technology. You got to update your data, and it's pretty elemental. I don't think we're discovering something here. It's there, and we need to take a look at it. And I want to ask Linda, Ms. Davis, there was underfunding for years. I mean, you look at the numbers and you see the cuts that were made. And that seriously eroded the service that you can provide to people. I understand that. We all do. I think, though, that the suggestions of making more cuts would simply make it worse. So what would happen to Social Security's customers? Customer service and disability application backlogs, if your budget was slashed by 30%?
So first of all, thank you very much for the question. I do have to tell you, I'm not an expert on budget issues, but I've been around the program for a long time.
Neither is the Congress.
Yeah, true.
Welcome.
But a 30% cut would be completely devastating to SSA. So people who apply for disability, they would wait at least 2 months longer than what they're currently waiting. It would likely impact the office hours for our field offices, even with level funding. Level funding from last year, from FY23, it's going to be detrimental to SSA. It's not sufficient for us to continue to build our DDS workforce or even maintain it for that matter. With only level funding, we would expect average wait time for an initial disability claim to go up, like I said, by 2 months, and actually double the average wait time from what they had experienced in 2019 pre-pandemic.
I think what we're looking for.
Gentlemen, time-wise right there. I love listening to you talk, but we over by about a minute.
I know what the cuts mean, but I want you to know how we feel, how I feel. And that is that even if we can avoid those cuts, we need a lot of changes and the policy of delivering service.
Okay.
And that's the point I think we can sit down and compromise and get to some final solution, if you'd call it. And I think that's important for us. I really do. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Now yield to the gentleman from the great state of Ohio, Mr. Carey.
I want to thank my friend Chairman Ferguson and Ranking Member Pasquale for once again hosting a hearing to discuss the issues that our constituents are facing as it relates to the Social Security Administration. As somebody who first read Future Shock when I was probably 13 years old, and then the third wave, I find it very troubling that we're still talking about phone calls and faxes, and the fact that we don't have government agencies that are able to communicate with one another. So I really wish that, and we just can't do it in this body, but I really wish we could have our constituent aides sitting up here with us that are dealing with you every single day, because the calls that we get are just remarkable. So, and again, faxes to me are basically like trying to find an 8-track tape player. So I just kind of think it's a little outdated. Listen, I know my office is not alone in hearing from our constituents over and over again about how hard it is to actually get a hold of Social Security Administration. I know my dear friends have talked about the cuts to staffing. Wait times for the 1-800 number continue to increase and have reached upwards of many times 30 minutes. Some people get kicked off. I've heard that several times. They've called and they call and they call and they call. The thing that reminds me of, when you go for a home loan application and you call any one of the national, you can get a call right back right away, or the wait time is pretty easy. And then you get an email, which seems pretty standard nowadays, right? It's concerning to me that SSA has done little to act on the backlog and at times made the problem worse. And I'm glad we're working today to get to the root cause of these issues and talk through solutions that SSA can implement to process claims in a timely manner and provide Americans more accurate decisions. I really, Mr. Camp, that story about the person waiting, 825 days, and then died of the disease or the affliction that could have been resolved possibly if they would have just had, gotten what they needed 500 days before. And I think it's a terrible story. So my question, and I'm running out of time here. When SSA evaluates the work history of a disability insurance applicant, the SSA reviews whether the claimant can still have any substantial gainful work performed over the last 15 years, known as a look-back period. SSA recently published a proposed rule to reduce the look-back period from 15 years to 5 years, right? Dr. Wojcicki, what are the effects of reducing this level of scrutiny as it applied to a claimant's work history?
Thank you for your question. Very simply, in the proposed regulation, the immediate result is an additional $27 billion in disability benefits. That is not related at all to an assessment of the person's ability to work, because basically you've chopped off 10 years of work history. And so there really is no justification provided in the proposed regulation. The data and studies that have been cited in the proposed regulation are misleading and incomplete. They misrepresent results, and then furthermore, the budget implications are actually severely underestimated, because it does not mention the additional cost to Medicare, Medicaid, and other federal and state welfare program spending. And finally, they justify it by saying that work conditions have changed over time, which they certainly have, and that's the whole point of getting new data, but yet they don't cite the data. So it's a very perplexing and disappointing proposal, really unjustified. I believe it should be removed.
So when you were at Social Security Administration, were you considering changes to the look period before?
Yes, in the context of a total reform of the program, and we did consider reducing it from 15 years to 10, which was justified by the data and by the evidence. But that's only in context of a much larger reform that modernized and automated the program. And when in the context of the larger change, it was a very small expense as opposed to $27 billion.
I want to thank you all, and again, I want to appreciate the chairman, the ranking member, for having this important hearing, and just know that we all do appreciate you. I know you probably spent many hours preparing for this hearing, and appreciate all your comments. Thank you very much, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Carey. Next, we go to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to our ranking member. Last week, this subcommittee met to discuss SSA overpayments, and my Democratic colleagues and I spoke about the delays in customer service, the lengthy phone wait times, and the catastrophic effects of proposed Republican cuts to Social Security. Yesterday, my Republican colleagues elected Speaker Mike Johnson, the chair of the Republican Study Committee, and the author of the budget proposal cutting and privatizing Social Security. In addition to his terrible record on issues like same-sex marriage and abortion, Speaker Johnson has advocated for a reduction in benefits and a 30% cut to SSA funding. And apparently my Republican colleagues see that as a positive attribute. But we know that this isn't the case. Social Security is a vital program that grants almost 9 million Americans disability benefits. Although the process for approving disability payments may be flawed, the solution to the issue is, from what I'm hearing today, not cutting costs. What I've heard today is that we need some policy changes, and we also need some important investments in the program. Ms. Burdick, I heard from several of the witnesses on the panel today that the hiring and retaining of staff is one of the biggest challenges to cutting the backlog. In fact, I heard things like, we need a consistent and stable workforce to reduce the backlog. We need hiring authority to prevent burnout and attrition. Those were just some of the things that I heard today from out of the mouths of witnesses. Can you tell us how cuts to SSA's customer service budget impact American people's ability to access their hard-earned Social Security benefits, including their Social Security disability benefits?
Cuts to customer service would be extremely harmful to people trying to access this system. As you've already heard, it is very hard to access Social Security right now. It is hard to get through on the 1-800 number. It can be challenging to apply for Social Security disability benefits. Many people who are applying for disability benefits are not even able to apply online yet. Even if there's a partial online application, there has to be an interview with the field office. And by cutting funding for customer service, that's going to be even more challenging. But I want to talk about it like on the ground. For claimants who are trying to apply for benefits, this can mean multiple appointments, multiple phone calls, and we see lots and lots of people get overwhelmed and drop out of the system because the thing they're applying for may be a disability that makes, in participating in this kind of process challenging in the first place, whether it's anxiety or cognitive limitation or so I think it would be very harmful if the customer service were to degrade even farther than it is now.
Thank you. And I want to thank you for your testimony that focused really on the hardships that people with disabilities face in trying to apply for and receive those benefits. And clearly, those hardships and delays could potentially be reduced by increasing the resources at SSA instead of cutting them. You mentioned that you supported President Biden's request in the budget. President Biden has requested a $1.4 billion increase for SSA's operating budget in 2024. However, some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have the opposite idea. The House Republican Study Committee, a committee that I'll note that every Republican on this subcommittee sits on, and which is chaired by a new speaker, has proposed a $718 billion cut to Social Security over the next 10 years. This plan is going to cut the funds that most disability insurance beneficiaries receive, and in some cases stop those benefits altogether. Ms. Burdick, why are Social Security disability insurance benefits so important to people with disabilities, and what would happen to disabled Americans if their benefits were reduced or even cut off entirely?
So just to be clear, that people who receive these benefits, as we've talked about, it's not only a long process, it's a hard process. You need to have a severe impairment that will last at least a year or be terminal, as some of the claimants we've talked about. So everyone who is relying on these benefits has a severe disability that is making it hard for them to work. They rely on these benefits for housing. They rely on them to pay for food. And if they're cut at all, that would be super harmful because right now the max benefit's already extremely modest. For SSDI, it's $1,400 a month. For Social Security, it's in the 700s. This is already a benefit level that makes it challenging for people to live in single-family homes. Often they're double upping. I frequently talk to claimants who cannot actually pay for all their bills and have very complicated practices. If I pay this much to this one and this much to this one. So any cuts would be extremely harmful.
Thank you for your testimony. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Next, we will go to the gentleman from Kansas, Ms. Estes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all our witnesses for being here today. You know, today's hearing reasserts a basic principle of American life, that government should work for the people. And that's why we have programs like Social Security Disability Insurance and SSI to help citizens when they need it most. And as representatives of the American people, we've been sent to the nation's capital to ensure that government does serve the people efficiently and effectively, mindful that it's the people that fund these government services. So it's disappointing and frustrating to hear some of the numbers being shared today. I mean, the Social Security Administration's failure to deliver these services is, almost you could say it's unconscionable. When I looked at, as I was preparing for this hearing, and I looked up and basically I would have to say that the Social Security Administration is failing in its mission to, quote, deliver Social Security services that meet the changing needs of the public, unquote. And how is it that over the past 2 decades, there's been a decrease in disability claims, applicants anyway, yet in recent years, the times have been increasing? And, as we talked about before, since 2009, wait times for initial claim decisions have increased by 83% to 220 days. I view it as a travesty that American citizens can't get the federal government to process a valid claim without them having to jump through hoops or paying an attorney to force the issue. No offense to the attorneys that are here that help solve that problem. However, instead of focusing on these issues, how we make sure the program works better, the SSA, under the direction of the Biden administration, has instead prioritized improving optics on equity initiatives. I say optics because how does it help any claimant, no matter their race or background, to wait longer to receive the benefits they've applied for? So already $100 million have been spent on these efforts in the last 3 years, and this year's SSA budget request allocates another $60 million to continue to boost these so-called equity efforts without accounting for the necessary process improvements and modernizations needed to actually service the wider base of claimants they're hoping to reach. And that's just one example of how SSA is falling short. We live in a dynamic and rapidly changing world, and SSA has failed to keep pace with this change in the workplace. Ms. Russell, in the past 40 years, we've seen significant improvements to access and care of these individuals with disabilities. However, it's been pointed out earlier that SSA is still using a dictionary of occupational titles from 1977 that was last partially updated over 30 years ago. How does that outdated data affect an examiner's ability to efficiently process a claim? And would you say it takes longer and delays some of the processing of those claims?
Thank you for the question, Congressman Estes. Yes, it does impact the processing time because the skills that we are looking to match a claimant to see if they can return to work in their relevant work history, it's hard to find that in the Dictionary of Occupational Titles. So it does take longer to process, and the jobs that we have today are not in the Dictionary of Occupational Titles. We have heard about the jobs that are in the Dictionary of Occupational Titles, and those skills just don't translate. So it does make the job harder for our disability examiners, and we look forward to when that is updated.
Yeah. So what do you do in the case of like a job title like a web developer? Obviously, that wasn't here in 1977. I mean, what's your steps that you do, and how do you sort through addressing their claim or their issue?
Well, in brief, the approach is to look at the job skills that the person had in their position. That's why the information on the work history is so important. And that's also why the information needs to be relevant and recent in the work history, because the job that a person did 15 years ago, they may not be able to do that job anymore. But for example, with your example, web design, we're looking at the skills that are described for that work, and then we're looking at skills that are in alignment with that for other jobs that are in the Dictionary of Occupational Titles.
All right, well, thank you. And I was glad to hear in your remarks, you talked about you have the funding to pay the personnel. You just need to be able to get them hired so that they can actually be there to do the processing, which obviously is an issue across the country now with our workforce shortages. And Mr. Camp, your story really, I guess, is heart-rending to go through that in terms of the issues that your individual that you referenced went through. I mean, how does something like the outdated DOT affect applicants and their process to go through to get their claims?
To wait hundreds of days only to be told that you're denied because you should go do a job that even the claimant knows obviously does not exist is discouraging, deeply bothersome. The claimants often stop the process. They leave the claims process. And from initial to reconsideration, there's a drop-off. From reconsideration to the judge stage, there's a drop-off of legitimate claims that may have been approved, because to be told after hundreds of days that this agency isn't really there for you and frankly is not taking it seriously, it causes claimants to come out of the process. And that is something that is not measured, but should be. It is remedied already by Department of Labor, and that would improve the process. That would make their the claimant's experience more reliable, more accurate, better for all of us. We want the correct outcome on the cases. If you are disabled, you should be approved. If you're not disabled, you should be denied. But it should be something you can rely upon. And some of the time, you might want to know what you should go try to do next. Perhaps there is a job out there where Social Security could help you get a suggestion, and then put you in voc rehab and go do it.
So thank you, and I yield back.
I want to thank the gentleman. I do want to remind all of you, we do have a 5-minute time limit, so if you do see that, I want to make sure that everybody has the right amount of time. So the chair now recognizes from the great state of New York, Mr. Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, what's clear here is Social Security has a severe customer service problem. It's not only inefficient, it's awful, and it's inhumane. And truthfully, it's not Social Security that's not fulfilling its mission. It's Congress that's not fulfilling its mission. Choose Social Security beneficiaries. 10,000 Americans turn 65 every single day. That's 303,650,000 each and every year. The United States is 30th of 39 countries in how much we pay Social Security benefits. Mexico pays more Social Security benefits to their people. Finland pays more Social Security benefits to their people, and Latvia pays more Social Security benefits to their people. 10,000 Americans die every year waiting for a disability claim. Every office here, Democrat and Republican, you have to explain to people that call our office about the Social Security disability process. And you have to, with a straight face, tell them that you apply, you go through this lengthy process. Good thing these people are retired in most cases, because otherwise they wouldn't have time to navigate through the Social Security bureaucracy. So you have to tell them to apply for Social Security disability benefits. And by the way, you're going to be denied. So that's a complete waste of time. And then that begins another lengthy process. From 2010 to 2023, Social Security customer service budget was reduced by 17%. Social Security Administration staff has been reduced in that same 13-year period by 16%. Social Security beneficiaries increased during that same period of time by 22%. Wait times for disability decisions are at a record time of 7 months, followed by a lengthy appeal process. Hold times, people that call the 800 number, just seeking some kind of direction and help in a customer service context are at all-time high. 40 minutes and 90 minutes at peak times. Hold times for people calling the 800 number was 14 minutes in 2021. It's now 40 minutes today. We're not moving forward, we're going backwards. So, Ms. Kerr-Davis, I mean, you people are just too polite. You people are too nice. You should be indignant about what Congress has done to this budget that really serves our people. 66 million Americans, about 1 in 5 collected Social Security in February of this year. So the Biden administration asked Congress for more than $15 billion. $15 billion for Social Security Administration operating budget for 2024. And as my colleague, Ms. Sanchez said, that's a $1.4 billion increase from 2023. How much did the Social Security Administration ask the Biden administration for?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the second.
How much did the Social Security Administration ask the Biden administration for?
So the amount that we need for this fiscal year to continue to make the progress that we had put in place in FY23 is $15.5 billion.
15.5. So that's what Social Security submitted to the Biden administration's budget director to say this is what we need.
I'll need to verify that was the amount that but I know that's what's in the president's budget.
So it's 500 million short.
Correct.
Okay. So you're asking Congress today to, when it does its work on the budget, if it ever gets around to that you actually need to address all of these problems that everybody here is concerned with, Democrat and Republicans, you need $500 million more.
Correct. So for us to continue to make the progress that we've made, so one thing you need to recognize is that we serve more beneficiaries than ever before. While agency and state staffing have been at all-time lows, people continue to go onto the retirement rolls and they continue to apply for disability. So we urge you to support the president's $15.5 billion so that we can continue to make the progress that we need. We realize we're not delivering the service that any of us
You missed my point. He asked for $15 billion from Congress for the total Social Security Administration operating budget in 2024. That is $500 million less than what you reported to the administration relative to what you need to address these problems that we've all cited. Okay. So you would ask Congress to approve $500 million more than what the president requested of Congress to get you to where we all seemingly want you to be.
Okay. So, yeah, I see your point. I
You're
see
way
your
too
point.
nice.
I'm
Look, I
going to
get it.
need to confirm that, and we'll submit something for the record.
Yeah, there's no more. The American economy we are 25% of the world's economy. We're 5% of the world's population. Our $25 trillion economy is 70% consumption. And if you have 66, $70 million Social Security beneficiaries in America today, and that goes up by 10,000 a day, offset by deaths, I presume, then these individuals are not saving that money. They're spending the money that they already saved throughout their entire lives. So not only is it good for the good that it does for these individuals, but it's also good for the economy of America.
Mr. Higgins, thank you. I need to move on. And, Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I have gone over the last two people about 4 minutes, so I just wanted to say, I know. So I'm moving on.
All right, thank you. Next, recognize the gentleman from the great state of Iowa, Mr. Feenstra.
Thank you, Chairman Ferguson, and thank you, Ranking Member. Obviously, I don't need to relitigate what everybody's saying, that we have a growing backlog of Social Security claims and disability decisions. We have a situation, that is just incredible of backlogs. We rolled back a lot of things that created efficiencies during the pandemic, and now we're going back to manual processes. My question to Ms. Kerr Davis, what is your solutions? I mean, where do we go? I mean, you're hearing from everybody, we got problems.
Yeah.
Give me 2 minutes, give me a minute here. What are you going to do about it?
Okay, well, we have a plan. We're working on a plan. So we didn't get here overnight, right? This is a convergence of factors that increased pending, increased wait times for both initial and reconsideration claims. So what we saw, recruitment and retention challenges, Jackie talked about that. Changes in the labor market for disability examiners. Attrition rate rose to a record high of 19.4% in fiscal year 21.
Okay, I want to hear what you're doing about it. I
Okay.
get all the stats, and let me give you a stat. Initial claim receipts are the lowest they've ever been since 2002. So we have a dramatically lower claims process or receipts than we ever had. So to me, that's the indicator, right, of how many people are claiming. And yet that's dramatically down. So I'm asking, the system is broken. All right, what are you going to do about it?
Okay, so we do. We have some short-term and long-term steps that we are planning to take. So in the short term, we have established cadres. And these are folks who work at SSA that have prior disability experience. They're federal employees where we have taken them, retrained them if needed, gave them refresher training, and we have diverted them to focus on the disability workloads, on the backlogs. We are also looking at the DDS hiring practices. As I mentioned in my testimony, the commissioner reached out to governors about what they could do to help us with recruitment and retention. We also have longer range plans that are more customer focused on communication policies. Again, people don't want to be contacted by phone. We also are improving technology and then looking at the vocational aspects or the look back period of what it takes to adjudicate a disability claim. So there's not a silver bullet here. It's going to be a lot of different factors, but we have short-term plans, we have longer-term plans. But to do that, we're going to need sufficient and sustained resources.
Okay, and you've got the resources. I mean, I've looked at what all the money that has come in, and this is my biggest issue that no one is saying. All right, you had just had an additional $60 million come in. There's a lot of money out there, and here's the problem: if you look over the last decade, all the money that's gone in to help this out, and we're still in this problem. I mean, this isn't just today's problem. This was 5 years ago problem. This was 10 years ago problem that we've been talking about this. We're still doing manual processes. SSA is still using occupational data from 30 plus years ago. So I hear what you're saying, but it does not resonate with me because of the long wait times that are happening. And it's from administrative law, right? I mean, being an administrative law judge, not myself, but you have to wait a long time before you get there, and then you have to wait another 60 days or more for the review decision. I mean, the process is broken. So, Mr. Warshawski, I mean, help me out here. As the appeals council process, has that ever been discussed of how long these wait times are?
Well, Congressman, I agree with the gist of your approach is that this is not a budget problem. This deterioration is very sudden and very severe, and it's come basically in the last 2 to 3 years. We really never saw such long wait times at the initial stages before. And really, there has to be it's not a budget problem. There is a management and labor, and maybe it relates to the reintroduction of the reconsideration. There's a more immediate problem here, and it's not related to long-term budget.
And I agree with you. I mean, I just look at it, the massive bureaucracy that's out there and that we're paying for, and yet we're not getting the results. And this is the bottom line: is why aren't we getting the results? This is what I'm trying to. I mean, in private sector business, we'd figure this out real soon. But here, obviously, federal bureaucracy, we just can't get it done. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Your line of questioning, your answer reminded me of something. Mr. Camp, I believe it was you that pointed out that what is considered an ideal wait time is 60 days. And that's not been met in 40 years.
Not ever.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to the gentleman from Florida. Mr. Stubbe, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Social Security Disability Program is broken. It's broken in its finances, it's broken in its process, it's broken in its modernization. The solution to these problems is not a dollar amount. As we have seen far too often, the federal government throwing money at a problem does not fix the process. Congress has already given hundreds of millions of dollars to the Social Security Administration to modernize its claims process. And if we have heard here today, SSA has failed completely. The Dictionary of Occupational Titles, the SSA's list of jobs, was created more than 40 years ago and last updated in 1977. I wasn't even born the last time it was updated. Some applicants have been denied disability because Social Security told them they could perform such jobs as egg processor, dowel pin inspector, or nut sorter. Yes, I said nut sorter. I mean, that's probably a good title for leadership in Congress these days, given what's going on. But though I know some folks in the Social Security Administration is denying claims based off of obscure and antiquated jobs that may not even be available. I have a gentleman who I know through my men's group, who I've gotten to be very close with, who has type 1 diabetes, is losing sight. He's now medically blind. He's had one surgery in one eye, can't see in the other eye. He's an Amazon driver part-time. He obviously can't drive a vehicle because he's now blind. I encouraged him to go to Social Security disability because that is why it was created, to help people in his circumstance, people that were working, now not working for a medical disability. And just to get the appointment was like 60 days out, just to get to the appointment to be able to then start the process, which then, we're talking about how long that takes. We're here today because of the historically high backlog of cases. Today, over 1 million Americans are waiting an average of 220 days for the administration to decide their initial claim, a more than 83% increase since 2019. The administration publishes its average hold time for its 1 to 800 number. Its own data shows that last year, the average time someone waited on hold was 32 minutes. So far this year, it's up to 36 minutes. It's unacceptable. The American people simply deserve better customer service from the government that they fund. Receiving Social Security benefits should not be an overnight process. There should be a clear vetting and examination process of claims, and not every claim will be or should be approved. But a timely process to examine cases is absolutely necessary. And these decisions need to reach transparent conclusions for the American people to take the next necessary steps. In one case earlier this year, Northern California District Judge Susan Ilston wrote that a disability claim denied by Social Security that ignored key physician records was, quote, so vague as to be essentially unreviewable. The decision was reversed by the judge and ordered SSA to pay benefits to the claimant, a woman suffering with schizophrenia, depressive disorder, and delusions. Mr. Camp, according to your testimony, half of the processing time at the initial stages of the application is consumed by the optional second step reconsideration. You note that the Social Security Administration's minimum acceptable number of days processing is 60. However, and you just stated it to the question of the chairman, current data shows that in my state of Florida, reconsideration adds 323 days to the 300 days at the initial stage. It takes 623 days for someone in Florida to get a disability. Can you explain why my state of Florida specifically has such long wait times?
There are several factors that cause the states to vary. One is that they're administered by separate state DDS programs with different staff, different management, different functionality. Another interesting factor is the extent to which the successful programs have been implemented in that state. One is health information technology, modern acquisition of the records, immediate, affordable, doesn't need to be staffed. That is a success in Iowa, say, where the processing times are very, very low because there are 2 large hospital chains in Iowa, and that provides hit access for the records, shaves off many, many days. In Florida, not so much. So there is less use of technology in Florida, and that slows it down.
When I have, my district alone is the most elderly district in the country. So obviously, that's also part of the challenges too. If the Social Security Administration eliminates the reconsideration phase, how do they ensure fraud is not occurring, and furthermore, exactly where would available resources be reallocated?
If you focus on what is actually done at reconsideration, you would see that it's not going to catch anything. If you don't do any work at a step, there is no need for more than 1 day for that. If you are merely clicking a box that says agree, you haven't read the file, you haven't caught anything, you haven't caught false statements, you haven't caught reliable medical opinions. It isn't of any value to do the same thing again hundreds of days later, 9 times out of 10. It's just not helpful. The quality can go up at initial if you take the existing resources, the existing staff, and give them more capacity to take a look, a more careful look at initial. All of Social Security's studies, now they need to report more on what happens with these pilots and all these studies that they've been doing about the claims process, but all of it reveals that if you have a DDS only doing initial, they do higher quality work. They pay more attention. They have more time.
I just want to, my time's expired, but I want to thank all the witnesses for being here today.
Thank the gentleman from Florida. Next, we'll call on my dear friend, Mr. Kildee from Michigan. Sir, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to you and the ranking member for holding this really important hearing. You know, Mr. Chairman, you said something at the outset of the hearing that I think was precisely on point. This hearing would be well-informed if we had our district staff sitting at this table testifying, because they have had to become quite expert in these matters. I've talked to my district director, I can't tell you how many times. And I still remember the first time when I was questioning him about a case that had come to my attention where there was an initial denial of a disability application. And he told me, and this is something Mr. Higgins referenced, he told me, well, everybody gets denied at the first step. Now, you know, that sounds kind of glib. And like, oh, that's just step one is your denial. That's completely unacceptable. And I think we all agree with that. That's completely unacceptable. Because the folks, and Mr. Camp, you made this point with the case you raised, these are not cases to be processed. These are individual human beings who are going through the worst experience in their lives and have paid into a system that denies them without really any substantive review, and then puts them through a process that makes it really difficult for them to get something that is due to them, that is a promise that we made to them. Now, where I think we may find some disagreement is how we fix the problem. The one thing I will acknowledge is that simply providing more money without using those resources to make the system work better doesn't solve the problem. But there's another thing I know absolutely. Punishing the Social Security Administration with deep cuts because we're unhappy with customer service only exacerbates the problem. It doesn't solve the problem, it exacerbates the problem. In either case, we've got to do a better job. And to the issue of technology that you raised, I don't think that we're going to get, you know, significant technological improvements through donations. We're going to have to acquire, and that's going to mean spending some money. So I could repeat a lot of the arguments that have been made, but I do have a particular issue that is tangentially related to this that has become a bit of a cause for me. And it's a small matter, but it's a big question for individuals that I represent. It has to do with a case that came to my attention. An individual in a nursing home who is dependent on supplemental income and also quite dependent on the personal needs allowance. And Ms. Burdick, I wonder, just based on your experience, if you could help us understand how the fact that what was once a $30 allowance is still a $30 allowance going back to 1987, which is worth about $12 right now for people who are living on very modest means and want to buy a birthday card for their grandchildren or replace a sweater because the one they've got is worn out. We got to do something about this. Congress needs to act to do something about it. I wonder if you just might comment on what it's like for a person who is living on such modest means to have such little support for the basic elements of a decent life.
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I mean, personal needs allowances, as you said, have not been updated for decades. They're supposed to give people who are living on benefits in institutions the money they need for personal items, toiletries, birthday cards, as you mentioned. $30 just doesn't cut it anymore. I think we all know that. I think I saw in the train station today, deodorant is $5. It isn't enough, and it needs to be updated. People really are struggling to get just the bare essentials.
I appreciate that. I don't know if any of the other panelists would like to comment. I would ask, Mr. Davis, what the effect of a dramatic cut would be on the reform efforts that you are initiating right now in terms of the disability process.
So as I mentioned earlier, it would be devastating. We made tremendous progress. I know it probably doesn't feel like it or sound like it, but we did 90,000 more initial claims in FY23 than we did in FY22. And, one thing that I think we all need to be cognizant is the impact that the pandemic had on the agency. It disturbed our normal operational flow. It impacted the labor market. And so, we are seeing the outcome of that and trying to recover. But, I feel like the money that is requested in the president's budget, the $15.5 million, we would make good use of it and continue to make the progress so that we can return to pre-pandemic pendings and pre-pandemic processing times.
I appreciate that, and thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. I'll just finish with this one point. Additional resources without a plan won't solve the problem. Additional resources to fund a plan gives us a shot. But I know for certain, deep cuts to the program will not make it better for the people that we serve, no matter what our circumstances might be back home. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. And let me just say, we all agree that this is, we need action on this. But I also think it's important when we talk about the funding that's there, okay? And really, I just want to think about this for 1 second. SSA has a $2 billion a year IT budget. That is a massive amount of spending. That's like, I probably want to find out on the number of customers you serve or people that you serve on a per capita basis. How is that $2 billion spent compared to, say, something in the private sector? That's a massive. That's a massive budget. And then also, I think it's important to recognize that the administration got a $784 billion bump above FY22 spending. And at the same time, the case levels are going down, as was highlighted by the gentleman from Florida. So until SSA can provide some clarity on where they're spending their money, how they're spending their money, and the fact I am flat over hearing that the problem during the pandemic is still hanging on. We have to move past that. That can no longer be an excuse for any part of this federal government. We've got to find a way to be innovative and get past it. We do it in our private businesses. We can no longer use that as an excuse. The world has moved on from that. I understand that it had an impact, but I will tell you this, I think, and I'm not trying to beat up on you because as you have said, some of these budgeting items are way above your head. But when you got a $2 billion budget and we're several years past the pandemic and you got a declining caseload, and ultimately there's a massive failure to implement new technology, I just think before you come ask for much more money, you got to be held accountable. We just need answers on how this massive budget is being spent and why it's not being spent efficiently. Because, again, if we can have a plan and we can know how to do this, then we can probably come to an agreement on how we best spend that money. But we can't just keep wasting money. With that, I'll climb down off of my soapbox now, and I will now yield time to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Kustoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the ranking member. Thank you to the witnesses for appearing today. Mr. Camp and Ms. Burdick, to both of you, we've talked about reconsideration. You all have talked about that in your comments. Ms. Burdick, you as a practitioner. So, Mr. Camp, thinking things through, let's assume it's just eliminated. And obviously that takes care of the additional time. So then what? What process, if any, or what procedure, or what next step would you suggest, or would it just end there after the decision?
Social Security ran a pilot for 20 years in 10 states to see what that would look like, and then ended it a few years ago, and gradually in state by state, there is now new data for what it looks like to add reconsideration back in. The results of that pilot, the state by state assessment, what happened to the number of days, what happened to the other parts of the process, we don't have it. They haven't shown us the data. We don't have an answer after a 20-year pilot for this idea that Social Security has floated since 1984 and that we're discussing today. There must be data and an answer. And then your question is addressed.
Right, and you don't have the data. The data doesn't exist. So, Ms. Burdick, from the practitioner, and you gave some real-world examples in your opening testimony, you recommend the elimination of it.
Absolutely. And the Social Security Task Force does as well.
The people that you represent that come before an ALJ, what have you, do you think you could explain to them that process is eliminated and that's for their betterment?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I was from a prototype state, so I had to explain to them after years and years that no, please appeal 2 times before we see a judge, which is a lot. But I think for most people, what makes sense, what is intuitive, is I do 1 paper application, and then if I'm denied, then I go to a judge. Having 2 doesn't really make sense. And it's easier for practitioners to get involved. I am one of a minority of attorneys that get involved at the initial and recon level because there isn't a hearing. There isn't an opportunity to advocate. You're just sending in paper. So I think it'll improve the system. But to your other question, there are other process recommendations, and I know I put them in my testimony, I think some other people, that could also be implemented at the initial level that would additionally, I think, help with the wait time and make things more efficient.
I probably shouldn't ask this, but I will. As a practitioner, what's your opinion of the ALJs that you appear before?
As a practitioner, I think many of the ALJs I appear before are fair. Obviously everything varies, but many of them spend hours reviewing claims. Often when I show up, they are familiar with the issues at hand and have good questions for the claimants about how these things affect their daily lives.
Thank you I appreciate the answer. If I could, to the acting deputy commissioner, and I want to follow up on something Chairman Ferguson talked about in terms of the money that's been appropriated for IT. Chairman Ferguson gave the figure of $2 billion. That's an accurate figure, isn't it? As far as you know.
As far as I know, I'd have to confirm that, though.
And over the last 10 years, according to data that I've got, the Social Security Administration has spent over $18 billion on IT. Do you know, is that number correct?
I do not know off the top of my head.
As a layman, $18 billion over 10 years for IT seems like a lot, even for an agency of your size, and we still have these issues. I do want to go to your written testimony when you talked about the challenges that you have and the DDSs have in terms of hiring and retention. And I do not want to sound insensitive, but I bet almost every employer in my district, in the private sector, small, medium, and large, talks to me about the same issues. They're offering good jobs. They can't get people to come in to apply, or they don't have the number of applicants that they would have pre-pandemic or 5 years ago. I guess what I'm saying is to suggest to you, your agency is no different from any other employer. Everybody's got these challenges. And I think that in terms of hiring and retention, respectfully to you, to any employer, we've got to think in different ways and think outside the box about how we attract applicants and how we retain them.
Yeah.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Next, my colleague and friend, Mr. Evans, great state of Pennsylvania, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. This opportunity to discuss one of the nation's most effective anti-poverty programs, Social Security. I want to be clear. Social Security is earned. If the insurance people pay for every payday, it is the bedrock of retirement security guarantee for nearly all of seniors. As a result of that question, I want to go to Ms. Burdick. In your testimony, you highlight the story of a client who had difficult qualifying for Social Security disabled, which we unfortunately is common for many Americans. Can you speak to the barriers individuals face when trying to access for Social Security disability benefits and how Congress can help remove these benefits?
Thank you for the question. There are a number of barriers, and I think, one of them is while applying, a lot of people get their health insurance through the acquisition of these SSDI benefits. So just from the beginning, if like with my first example with a woman who was terminated before she applied, she has an additional barrier of not being able to access health insurance during the application process, which makes it harder to establish that you have the disability. But because of, chronic disinvestment, there has been customer service problems at SSA, which make it harder to access the agency. Some of the recommendations that we've had, which I know SSA is working on and I think will go farther with more funding, is making sure more of the applications are online, making sure things are more accessible, that there are people to call to get help. It is a very complicated system. And although some people get representatives, and in order to help them, there aren't enough. And I think making sure there are enough claims representatives to help people navigate, to understand the problems is really, really important. But finally, having this additional effort to make sure that DDSs get it right the first time by really taking extra steps to make sure they're getting treating source evidence will help everyone access their benefits more quickly, because treating doctors are the ones that really know.
In your comments that you just made, and what Mr. Higgins questioned Ms. Davis, and specifically about Congress, talking about our responsibility, not talking about Social Security, our responsibility. That's what I'm most interested in hearing you talk about, our responsibility.
Well, thank you for the clarification, and you're right. So one of the things that Congress can do is they can help rework the statute and the regs to make sure Social Security is focusing on treating source evidence. There was a rule that used to prioritize treating source evidence called the treating physician rule that was eliminated, and that should come back, because if everyone is focusing on the treating doctor, we will get to the right decision, or Social Security will get to the right decision earlier, which will really impact things. But the other thing that Congress can do is funding. Make sure not only it's one time, but sustained funding, so Social Security can do the work they need to do to make customer service better and make it easier to access these benefits.
I thank you for your clarity. And I say that to you because I just joked with Mr. Higgins, and he's from the great state of New York and Baltimore. He's a Baltimore Buffalo fan. So he and I have a constant running discussion. So from his clarity, I wanted to make sure we make this connection. So, and I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to the gentleman from Utah. Mr. Moore, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member. Appreciate the discussion today. So I recently had to go to DMV in Utah, and I'm here to tell you it was the single best experience I've had. Utah has, I don't know how long it had been since I'd been there, but I had waited a ton before. I pre-made an appointment. I filled out the electronic information. I showed up. I was processed within like 7 minutes. Over time, the bad rap that places like that get, have embraced technology and have used it to dramatically improve customer service. And that's the essence of my question here. And it's because sometimes the pandemic in a lot of ways forced us to change a little bit. And so my questions first is for you, Ms. Kerr Davis. It's my understanding that signed faxed applications were accepted during that period, and now they're not being accepted. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Could you just share a little bit of context on like why that's the case? What are you doing to embrace as much technology as possible to help alleviate some of the wait times, the burden, the showing up when you really arbitrarily don't need to always show up for something? Just kind of give me some context on that.
Of course. Thank you for that question. So during the pandemic, we did put in place a number of flexibilities so that we could continue to serve the public. And in some cases, we've ended these flexibilities for a variety of reasons. But I want to be clear that we do accept fax applications as leads, and then we will contact the claimant, schedule an appointment, or complete the application over the phone, and then have them attest to their signature. I do want to go back to your comment about the DMV. So I had a similar experience in Kansas at our DMV. Did everything, went online, got a text, a reminder, went in, everything, and very quickly. We are in the process of moving in that direction at SSA. But as you know, we have a lot of security issues that we have to consider.
I share a building in my district with your team, and I totally get the differences that do exist.
Yeah. So, but that's where part of that $2 billion went, is modernizing our system and moving in that direction. It's just going to take us some time to get there.
So I appreciate that context, and just to reiterate, like it's out there. And I represent a huge IRS processing facility in Ogden, Utah as well. And that's the number one thing I hear from constituents and from the folks that I serve that work at that facility is there is a desire and a need to embrace as much technology as possible because it's out there, and we're seeing it work, and take for whatever good examples that can come from more bite-sized approaches like you can from a state level DMV, and just encourage you to continue to do that. It's huge. We cannot get into a position of just we got to throw more money at things. We have to innovate as we're approaching this, and that's what I appreciate Mr. Camp and Mr. Warshawski's testimony, particularly, and I'll quote this. The Social Security could improve the decision process for claimants that would utilize, and again, quote, existing authority, appropriations, and staffing. So it kind of gets to my point. There is opportunities out here with what already exists. Let's improve that as much as we possibly can, build on that, and then reassess what we need with regards to workforce and everything to solve to fit the needs. Can you like to share anything else that you would do to help modernize this process as we think about the next 5 to 10 years and in the crucial time for Social Security? Because I think the next 5 to 10 years is the most important time of this organization.
Well, Mr. Moore, I don't know if you addressed your question to me, but I will
Yes.
say that the vocational tool, the VIT, which the agency spent $10 million on, that was part of the IT budget, they're not using. And it depends on the new data, but the data exists. So it's really a real question, really, as to why this has not been implemented, and it would reduce time significantly because it would automate the process. It would be an application of technology as well as new data that would certainly speed the process, the adjudication process, significantly. I'll also sort of note that that not only are disability claims declining, but during the pandemic, the agency didn't do a lot of work. So it's really a mystery, and really, I think the agency needs to explain why this problem has developed, given that their workload declined so much, and it continues to get worse.
Mr. Camp, anything to add?
They already have the fax machines in every office. They already turn them on in the morning. Count it. Let us actually fax something, and let us save those weeks. Easy.
Yeah, and I would argue that we'd be moving past fax machine too. So if it's there, let's take advantage of it, and let's continue to embrace whatever we can. I think it is the best tool that we have to continue this, and I think that's something that has to go across the board. So, Chairman, I am done with my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. I do think it's just a sad state of affairs when we're talking about whether or not we should cut on a fax machine. We might as well strap these notes onto carrier pigeons and send them as well. With that, we will move to the gentleman from the Commonwealth of Virginia. Mr. Byer, you're now recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and thank you and to the ranking member for holding this. As all the members of Congress here, lots and lots of negative feedback on our constituent service. It's a really consistent thing, and I share our frustration. I'm a huge fan of process management. Rather than just throwing money at things, taking the pieces apart and trying to look at each section of it. So an obvious question, and not to be repetitive, but I'd love to get the answer. As best you can, Ms. Cara Davis, why haven't we eliminated reconsideration? We have 20-year projects. All the groups think it's the right thing to do. Why do we cling to it?
So we did test it as, someone on the panel mentioned here. There are thousands of people who receive benefits are allowed at the reconsideration level. It's actually streamlines the process. It's costs less money to process a claim at the reconsideration level, but certainly if that's something you're interested in exploring, we're happy to work with you on the technical aspects of that.
Are you aware of any legislative attempt at the congressional level to eliminate reconsideration?
No, I'm not currently.
Okay. Ms. Burdick, it's the same line of thought on process management. The treating physician rule. Again, I'd love to know, why did they get away from that? Is there a sense that you can't trust the physicians that are treating these people because they're their friends and they're from their communities? Or is there a really valid reason why the treating physician rule shouldn't be in place?
The task force would endorse restoring the treating physician role. And I will say, when they eliminated it, none of the reasons that were put forth we found were very compelling. I mean, because when it comes down to it, there doesn't seem to be any reason why you wouldn't try first and foremost to get the treating provider to weigh in on a person's claim.
They're the ones who know them best.
They do. And without that, there's this reliance on Social Security consultative examinations, which are there for a reason, but this is a one-time doctor, usually doesn't have any of the specialties of the person who's talking to them. It just isn't, the evidence created isn't as persuasive. It takes time, it costs money, and it would just be so much more efficient to go to the source in every case.
Thank you. Mr. Camp, Dr. Warshawski suggested that because the attorneys get paid on the total amount due, there's an incentive to postpone it as long as possible. How do you react to that as an attorney representing these folks?
It isn't our real world. We get hired to obtain the appropriate outcome, but as fast as possible. Every client that retains an attorney is expecting us to make the agency perform better services, to go faster primarily. We're the ones on the phone with the clients every day. We're the ones that are frustrated in being blocked and speeding up the cases. It is our job to make the claim go faster. And that would be an unacceptable failure to serve your client, which is not something professionals do if they expect to last.
Thank you. Dr. Warshawski, to roll up, let me quote you: "The currently needlessly complex and outdated rules that both claimants and agency use to determine eligibility for disability benefits have to be simplified, modernized, and automated." Is there anyone charged with doing this? Who owns that charge?
When I was at Social Security, I was in charge, and the regulation was written. In fact, it was ready to go literally days before the change of administration. So it's there, and it was an agency-wide, in fact, even a government-wide effort. So it involved people from the Office of Management and Budget. They were extensively involved. The entire agency, people in operations, people in the actuary's office, people in the hearings office, the budget office. It was a total agency effort. My very rough estimate is that it cost $100 million in terms of people time to do that, in addition to the expenditure of $300 million for the data. and it stopped. It's sort of inexplicable.
And what would the savings be if implemented?
Well, I can't speak to that in terms of, it would definitely speed things up because it would be automated, and that's really, and it would be relying on current data, so that would provide much more accuracy at the initial level in the claims. I think it would be a vast improvement.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back just with the question that, once again, there may be a window for legislative initiative here, too.
I thank the gentleman, wholeheartedly agree with you. I'm going to ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record the fiscal year 2022 disability decision data. This came from SSA's budget document. The ranking member and I have been looking at this. The reason I think this is so important is it speaks to the reconsideration process and how many initial level claims then get bumped to that, and then how many are stuck in that regulatory purgatory that then ultimately go to the administrative law judge and get corrected. I think this document highlights very much a very, very broken system. So without objection, I'd like this submitted.
Chairman, I want to just mention one thing. We're so anxious to move it into an automation world for the last 60 years. We're so anxious to do that, and yet the process of tracing a gun, the numbers, we still don't automate it. So that's what takes so long, to trace a weapon and to find out about a perpetrator. So when we talk about automation, we're talking also, obviously, about the heart of policy. Whether we want to do it and find the reasons to, or don't do it and keep our heads in the sand. So I just wanted to add that. Automation is very important to modern living. And I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, since the subject came up, we don't know the result of the pandemic, particularly with our own children. That's for another day. Thank you.
Thank you. And I appreciate your embrace of technology. This comes from a good friend who every now and then will whip out his flip phone next to me. So with that, again, I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today. Thank you for your time, your candid answers. Please be advised that members have 2 weeks to submit written questions to be answered later in writing. Those questions and your answers will be made part of the formal hearing record. With that, the subcommittee stands adjourned.